All right, Dad. I'm gonna see if you know your daughter-in-law well. Okay.
Mm, okay, this is a podcast about puking, and the first question is, do I know my daughter-in-law well?
Yeah. I think
Ooh,
I think you may already have already answered the question. What is my wife's greatest fear?
stomach, puking, that kind of stuff.
Stomach bug. It's it maybe it's not her greatest fear, but it's definitely top three. It's
Well,
definitely top.
before the kids were born, it may have been her greatest fear because I think she was more worried about that than you. But now that the kids have come along, I think the kids and the dog.
Yeah, there are other fears, but oh, when it comes to the stomach bug, this is nothing that she wants to even get near. You may be thinking, why on earth are we asking this question? Well, it's because one of you asked this question. Today, here at the Church Answers podcast, we're going to be answering listener questions, and we talk about listener questions. These are people who interact with Church Answers in lots of different ways. So it's not necessarily a direct listener on this podcast, but it's people that we connect with on a regular basis. If someone asked a question about puking in a church, and so
Mhm.
we're gonna answer that question. We're gonna ask it and answer it here in just a minute. But before we do that, we are so glad you're here. We're glad you've joined us here on the Church Answers podcast. My name is Jess Rayner. I'm here with my dad, Thom Rayner, and we do want to thank our sponsor of this podcast, Cheney and Associates. They are the church accounting firm. That's what you hear often. They want you to lead your church, and they're going to handle the numbers. They're going to handle the finances. And so if you have any accounting, bookkeeping, finance needs, reach out to Cheney Associates. I recently just did a discovery call with them for my church, and we're talking about what they can do for my church. Tremendous call, easy. Chris was amazing. He even helped me with some volunteer issues with my not issues or volunteer ideas, I should say, with my finance team. And so you will be surprised what will come out of that conversation. Reach out to Cheney Associates. Go to CheneyAssociates.com/church answers. Your time is precious. And so they want to help you with that and help you get back to leading and not focusing on maybe some of the details, but get back to the big picture of your church. So check out Cheney and Associates. So back to the puking.
Back to the puking. And by the way, Jess, I want to thank you for that introduction. Uh, I get a lot of spam calls, and particularly in the area of Medicare, that kind of stuff,
Okay.
especially with renewal. And so I saw that was coming in, and my phone's on silent. So I just put the phone up to the computer and let them listen to you in the introduction. And
So, I, oh, wonderful! I'm so glad that I got to talk to a spam call during that.
yes, yes.
Look at this multitasking. You never know what you're going to get here on the Church Answers podcast.
Well, I took advantage of you had your soliloquy going, and I wanted to just let them listen to it. It was so
Well,
good.
hopefully they go to CheneyAssociates.com/church answers. So church dash answers. I hope they do that. So, well, let's get back to the first question here. Again, these are questions we've received here at Church Answers, and we're going to answer them. And by the way, if you're listening or maybe you're watching with us on YouTube, if you want to answer in the comments section below, do that. Let us know how you would handle some of these situations.
Yeah,
We'd
that's a
love
great idea. I'd
we'd
like to
love
hear from our listeners and our viewers.
yeah, we'd love to hear that and see that and read that. All right, so here's the first question. Someone puked loudly while I was preaching. They put the word loudly, okay? This wasn't something small. Someone puked loudly while I was preaching. How should I handle unexpected interruptions?
Well, I think the first thing you say is don't make a joke of it. But you might be tempted to say, "Well, they didn't like my preaching," but probably the person and their family members are not going to be too happy with that. It's most of the time you stop the service for something that abrupt,
Mhm.
and you just say, "Hey, we have a person that's obviously ill here. Let's just take a few minutes and just go into a time of quiet or prayer or whatever." I don't know. What would you do?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the severity of it. I think it depends on where it is, when it is. If it was in the middle of worship,
This was
uh,
in the middle of a sermon. I should have given that context.
oh no, you're right. It does say while I was preaching. That's my
Oh,
fault.
okay.
While
I
I
didn't.
was preaching, if this was someone in the very back, and they made it out part way, and they're out of the service. I'm just thinking like maybe they just didn't make it all the way, but they've exited. I probably wouldn't stop the sermon.
I agree.
If you could just maybe make a pause. I think it depends on just how big of an interruption is. If this was like second row and and there's like a violent reaction and the smell, if it's that big, you may just say, hey guys, we're gonna pause for a second. I get that, someone's sick right now. I'm gonna ask our facilities team to come help clean up. And just acknowledge it. Sometimes if everyone in the room is thinking about it,
you just got to acknowledge it.
You got to stop and acknowledge it. And if it's depending on the situation, you may even just ask, hey, we're just going to come up and just someone's going to play, song just for a minute, and we're going to come back to the sermon. That gives people time to kind of clean up, get things, especially if there's a smell,
There's another issue. If the smell lingers, what do you do? But yeah, I totally agree with you, Jess. I acknowledge what is happening if everybody's already thinking about it.
Right.
Now, you got to hear my story.
Listen, I don't know how much more of the puke talk I could take, but hopefully
the puke was the third week, and it was not bad, and it was toward the back, so I didn't have to say anything.
Right.
Okay? So that part of it was not bad. But on 2 consecutive weeks on flights, someone died on my flight.
Oh, man.
2 consecutive weeks. And one almost tragic. They had a little girl with them, and she kept saying, wake up, daddy, and all that kind of stuff.
Jeez.
So
you're really bringing us down a notch now.
Okay. Well, I had 2 apparent heart attacks, and then the minor episode, which was vomiting. And I was thinking, maybe ministry is really not for me. I don't need to travel this much. And I've never had that. I've never had it happen again. 3 straight weeks where I just said, what am I doing? But those are my stories. And so I wanted to pick up the audience and make them feel real good. And let's, keep it going. Let's go another question, Joe.
I'm sad now.
Yeah, I know.
But at least my mind's off the puking. Those are interruptions that I pray never happen. I pray that the only interruptions maybe you have is someone getting sick, and that's the worst of it.
By the way, your oldest brother actually threw up while preaching, or he stepped down and he left his microphone on. And then
that's what it was. Yep. He forgot to turn his mic off, and so did the person running the front of house board. They forgot to turn off as well. That one's tough too.
Yes, it is.
So to answer the question, how should you handle unexpected interruptions? You have to go with how big of a distraction is it? If everyone is thinking about it, you need to address it. If a lot of people are thinking about it, you might want to say something. And you just say, don't joke about it. If it's something you can joke about, humor's always great. But obviously, if someone's sick or ill, that's not the time to joke. But if you can do that,
I think a lightning bolt or something popped during a service. I'm trying to remember. And we all jumped, and of course you acknowledged it. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something like that.
Yes, that's happened more than once here. When you're a young church plant, we've pieced together a lot of our equipment over the years, so it always happens. There's something. If I can acknowledge it in a humorous way, I do that. So it helps.
Yes, it does.
All right, so that was our first question. I'm ready to move on.
Let's move on
from that one. And again, these questions don't have necessarily any connection, any flow.
They have no connection. I picked out some that I thought would be a little bit different.
Yes. So you're going to think about, man, I'm just getting whiplash from question to question. You are. All right. So here's our second question. Changing topics. 2 churches have approached me to serve as pastor of both of their churches. So 2 churches, same pastor. 2 individual churches want one person to be both of their pastors. The question is, how do I discern if I can do it?
And comment, this is becoming more common as we have fewer pastors and more churches needing pastors. It is something that some faith groups have worked on for a long time. Methodists have gotten down the circuit rider and having one pastor for 2 or 3, even 3 churches down. a whole lot. Some congregations have just never gotten to this. They've either had a lead pastor that they can afford full time, or they've had a bivo pastor.
Hmm.
This is a new world. Uh, we got someone in our platinum group, Jess, that serves an Assembly of God and a Methodist church,
Uh-huh. Yep.
and Billy managed both of them well. And we'll get to a question about issue about doctrine in just a moment, but
Hmm.
he handles that well
Yep.
too. So you start answering the question. The first thing you got to do is just say, "What's the expectations?" We got to have clear expectations.
Yep.
If you're serving two churches, they need to be clear. They need to be written. Uh, you will also have churches that will be have a preference. I was about to say fighting over, but have a preference. We want the pastor at 10 o'clock. We want the pastor at 10:30.
Hmm.
You have to come to some kind of resolution of that. And uh, you understand when one of the churches wants prime time. Do you alternate them? That's not the best way to go, really, because it confuses the congregation. It confuses guests.
Yep.
So decide many things up front. That then shapes your time, and then you will decide the time accordingly.
Yep.
What do you think?
You have to think through every potential logistical challenge,
Hmm.
because you can't be in two places at once, and so you have to have everything outlined, from service times to preachings to pastoral care to office hours. You have to really get down to the nitty gritty of expectations. You even got to ask too, like, well, just kind of, if I'm in this situation, I'm just being blunt. I'm asking every question. It's like, do you really want a pastor, or do you want a chaplain? And one of these churches just may want a chaplain. They just may want someone to come in and preach and be with them. One of the churches may like, no, we want a pastor to come lead, and really just kind of being upfront and honest with those. And that way you can kind of gauge expectations about, okay, what is it you're really looking for? And being fair, I depending on if the churches are equivalent size, if
Hmm.
if one church is running 25, another church is running 150, that you're going to have to weight one more than the other. So you're going to have to think through all these different pieces. And two, I think you got to understand, are you wired to do that?
Yeah, yeah. I would not be wired to do that. I would want to go all in.
Yeah. I would be one to be maybe go, maybe.
Well, and there are people who are called in that direction too.
Yeah. So you got to understand you, and you got to think through you. Like, is this something that that will, after a year's time, I'm going to be exhausted, or after a year's time, I'm going to be energized?
That's a good point, but and redundant. But this is going to be asked more frequently.
It is.
It's already being asked more frequently. That's why the question is here. This is not a singular person that asked this question. Probably represents 5 or 6 that I saw when I was going through the questions.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was common.
Yeah. And my guess is, well, you can tell me this. Are you seeing it more of two churches that don't have a pastor, that they're trying to find one, or a church that has an existing pastor where another church has approached that pastor and said, can you do our church as well?
Usually not the latter.
Okay.
Usually it's coming from it's where the pastor is talking to one and then talking to another. It is usually not someone coming and saying, "Hey, we want part of this pastor's time to the other church." But you're going to have all kind of things going on, and it usually happens within the laity and not necessarily with the pastor, because they say, "Hey, uh, what's your attendance now? Hey, 30. How much you paying your pastor?" And they give an amount. And then the other one says, we're about the same. We really should combine our resources.
Okay.
That's happening more and more. And as churches have gone from a size of 125 to 55 in median worship attendance in 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
it is really something that is growing as a growing need.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of questions that I would have to have answered before I jumped into that. And then two, what's the long term mindset? Do these two churches potentially, is there something down the road where they come together to become one? That would be a question that I would ask at the onset. If God leads this direction, are you open, or is it a hard no? Um,
As I am listening to these different scenarios, most of them are too distant to have any type of merger or
okay,
combination.
okay.
Most of them are.
Physical distance or
So
doctrinal different distance?
physical distance,
Okay.
which again makes the problem of going from one to another on the same day problematic too.
Yep. Yep. That's a lot. Well, regardless, I think in this situation, both churches are going to need to reach their community.
Hmm.
And if you are listening to this and you're thinking, hey, that sounds great for my church too, I want to reach my community. One of the great ways to do that is through Upward Sports.
For any size church.
Hmm.
That's what I want to reiterate. Oh, that's for the big churches. No, Upward will bring a sports league to your church, whether you have a gym, a parking lot, or just borrowing a field somewhere. Love those folks. I think I said in the last podcast, yes, I'll be doing a webinar for them in a few days from the recording of this podcast.
Right.
Our relationship with Upward is great and
Yep.
growing, and we're glad of it.
Yeah, they do a tremendous job in using sports, basketball, flag football, soccer, cheerleading, volleyball, running for adults, all these different things that they can engage the community through your church, with your church, for your church, lots of different ways. And so don't think there's any limitations in size or facilities. Give them a call. It's amazing what they can do. Or go to upward.org/church answers and go check them out that way. Yeah, if thinking about if you're going to be pastoring two different churches, you need to think about outreach, but you also need to think about doctrinally.
Yep.
What would do these two churches potentially align? Are they super different in their statement of faith and beliefs? Which leads us to our third question that we have received. And the third question is this: our church is considering adopting another church. How do I deal with the doctrinal difference between the two churches?
The obvious statement is, how far apart are you?
Mm-hmm.
And will it hurt the witness, the testimony, and the doctrinal integrity of one church to say we're going to yield and have a change in our doctrine? So that's one part. The other part is, if you do a triage of doctrine, which ones are you going to say are critical for fellowship? Which ones are you going to say are critical for acquisition of a church? And if a church is will quickly yield on its doctrine, that may be a problem in itself because
Mm-hmm.
they were not committed. So I know that your brother's church was approached 3-4 years ago about an acquisition, and it was a church not much smaller than his, so it wasn't a small church, and the doctrine stopped it immediately. Uh, and the pastor of the other church said, "I think our folks would be okay with it." And Sam said, "Go ask them." They weren't. So it stopped it right there. It's hard to reconcile significant doctrinal differences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. In this situation, I would have each church write down primary, secondary, tertiary.
Hmm.
Um, and hopefully they already have it. Hopefully there's a statement of faith, statement of beliefs that they've already articulated what is primary. I know at the Church of Spring Hill we have 9 primary statements that we are absolutely unwavering on, and the only way we could potentially partner with any organization, and that's any organization, even like mission organizations, if they align with those 9. I think the Bible is abundantly clear, and so you have to have that conversation. What's primary? What's secondary? What's tertiary? I think
Sometimes
that's
you
good.
just need to pass.
What's that?
Sometimes you just need to pass and say this is not the path we need to go.
Yeah. And it's amazing, some people may put eschatology as tertiary, but some may put it as primary. Um,
Tell
even
me.
even though they could, and so you may say, eschatology is, we could align in it, but even what order, like if that's a primary issue for you and it's a tertiary issue for us, that can create problems, even though you might believe the same thing.
Right.
And so that's why I'm saying it's important to know what you believe, but also the weight of each one. And I think obviously there's some things that the Bible is just abundantly clear on. And so write those down, figure those out.
And sometimes it's the secondary issues that are the greatest tripping points. Um, how someone views the manifestation of the gifts of the Spirit. That's they may call it a secondary issue, but because it is something that is discussed and debated quite often, the church members may say, no, It's one of the primary for us, though I would think salvation through Christ would be a little more primary. But because of the view of the church members, it may go right up there on the list. We have seen that happen with the complementarian egalitarian issue, where that in many churches has risen to the top where it was not
Mhm.
several years ago.
Yeah, and it gets back to the heart of it all. Um, you're going to start uncovering if you're in a situation like this, you're going to uncover like can these people really work together? And that's going to show up when you have these. How passionate are they about a particular doctrinal issue, particular theological issue?
You've actually had people come to the church, and it hadn't been that long ago, and they say, I'm not going to give the doctrinal issue because it would call out the particular person coming by. And you basically, in a very nice way, said, no, that's not who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, one of my elders recently, I forgot the situation, what it
Oh, I
was.
remember I had that same discussion. So I do, I remember as much as you do.
Yeah, I think it was towards the end of the year. Maybe I was out of town, and a first time guest found one of the elders and basically asked a theological question about what we believe as a church, and they had a quick discussion. And that elder, and I've said this as well, this elder said, well, I don't think this is the church for you.
And he answered right. And I do remember the issue.
Yeah, I do too. I was trying to remember the setting, but I do remember the issue because he said, "Hey, I'll let you know I had this conversation while you're gone."
And he
But
handled it well.
and I would have said the exact same thing. But the point is, like, even as a church, whatever you're leading, you have to know those as well.
He approached me rather humorously. He said, hey, now that you're on the greater ministry out in the parking lot, I just want you to know I failed you. We got one that's not coming back.
Yeah, but it's super important. I mean, from any perspective, to have those articulated and you know them well, it avoids just future tension, if you will, or future harder conversations if you just say it up front. So, that was our third question. Again, today we're looking at questions that we have received at Church Answers over the years, or all these are actually pretty recently. And we've gone from puking to pastoring two churches to two different churches that have doctrinal differences, which leads to our fourth question. Again, just kind of jumping around all over the place, although the second and third were kind of close. The fourth question that you have received, Dad, this is no one asked me this question. You've received this question
frequently.
You've answered it, but I think it's good that we answer it here. Is, are denominations really dying?
Yes, they are, and they are dying at a pace much quicker than most people really understand and realize.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an emphatic, okay? I'm basically talking about American denominations. I'm not going to get globally because it will shift once we get to Africa or South America or even an occasional spot in Europe. But American denominations are dying. Now, are there exceptions? Very few. One of them would be Global Methodist, but Global Methodist growth is largely coming as churches disaffiliate from United Methodist. So that's a lot of their growth. I'm hopeful that they will continue to, but that's where they're new. That's their growth. Another one that is growing is Presbyterian Church of America, but it is so small as a denomination. It just has not had much growth. It's just a few every year. It's just incremental growth. But Ryan Burge won't even measure them because he says they're too small. But come on, Ryan. At least they're growing. The consistent exception has been Assemblies of God, where they grew for more consecutive years in the other denomination than they stopped. But now they've started back. And they stopped post-COVID. They lost some momentum. But now one of the amazing things is they're about to regain their trend line. And what I mean by that is they dipped below their trend line. And if you just kept it going to where it was, they're about to catch up now. So that is my report on all denominations. And I'm grateful also to Ryan Burge. And if you want to see his data, go to Graphs at Religion. We'll put it in the show
Graphs
notes.
About Religion?
Graphs About Religion.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan. like you're really listening to me today. Graphs About Religion.
I think it's that.
We'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But his blog is excellent, but it's full of stats. And I eat them up. I eat stats for breakfast and feel energized. Some people just say, "Oh no, I can't take this." But most people like what he has to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And two, I mean, it's sad, because it goes back to the emphasis is we need to get back out there and just start sharing the gospel again.
And
Uh,
Jess, just as a kind of a footnote to that, non-denominational churches are largely growing, yes, but as I begin to look under the hood, they're not growing by conversion growth.
Transfer growth.
They're growing for denominational growth or denominational churches.
So people are leaving the denominations.
Yes, they're leaving the denominations and they're going there. So uh, I'm looking at these non-denominational churches, and I was talking about a non-denominational church in our previous podcast, and it's a Low Country Community Church in South Carolina. And I told the pastor, we had him, you were gone, and I interviewed him on a podcast, and I told the pastor his church is one of the few denominational churches where I've seen significant conversion growth.
You said they're non-denominational or denominational?
Non-denominational. They're one of the
Okay,
few non-denominational churches where I've seen significant conversion growth.
gotcha. Okay, yeah. Well, that's at the end of the day, that's what we all need to get back to is the heart of the
Yep.
gospel and sharing Christ. So that was our fourth question. Are denominations really dying? Which brings us to our fifth and final question that we have received here at Church Answers, and it's this: should our church make the pay of our staff visible to all church members? So I assume the question is here, like we're talking raw numbers for each staff member. Just throw it up on the screen on Sunday morning.
I don't know about throwing it up on the screen, but at least having it available. You know, you've got that tension between transparency and a and unity of staff. And on this one, I lean toward the unity issue. And
Uh-huh.
I just simply say, unless somebody has an urgent need to know what every staff member makes, I don't see the benefit in doing so. You can have transparency in different ways, but this is going to cause a significant unity factor. Even large corporations make the maybe the top 5 or 6 of, required by the SEC or somebody available, but they don't show all the employees. They don't show mid managers because, well, for a lot of reasons. But one of the things would be so disruptive to that organization that they could hardly function. And so, as a general rule, I lean toward I lean toward transparency, but here I would be more cautious and not make it available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on the whole unity factor. I mean, if you had a staff, I don't believe every staff should get paid the exact same amount.
I
There's
agree.
education, there's experience, there's just leadership, there's effectiveness. There's a lot of things that go into how much a person is paid. And so if if you make that available, then this person's like, why is this person making more than me?
I
And
work harder than that person. I do more. It's
and resentment
oh,
begins to set in. And then on the other side, from a church member standpoint, uh, I just don't know if it's healthy. It's you kind of be like, well, you wouldn't want your salary, made known to the whole church
exactly.
as well. Whatever
How far do you
workplace you do.
extend transparency? Do you now extend it to the giving records of people if you want full transparency?
That's a good point. We'll
Right.
we'll we'll put all the church salaries out there if everyone puts their giving out there. Some people might be okay with that, but the large majority probably would not. Yeah, it doesn't feel healthy for an organization. I think I know what we do at my church is we have one big bucket that says personnel, and it all gets dumped into that one bucket, and we present that bucket to the church. Now, every other line item is available to church members. I mean, every other line item. We when we do our budget, we do big buckets to the church. We let them see all the big buckets, and then any church member that wants to see line items, we'll give it to them. That's not a problem at all. But honestly, nobody. I think I've had like one or two people over the years actually ask for the line item. I'm like, sure, whatever. Most people just don't want to know that love, that detail, that granular detail.
Well, that's because they trust you and they trust the church. As long as
Sure, sure, but it's also just some people just okay. Let's kids ministry. I don't need to see exactly how much of that's going to snacks and how much of that's going to curriculum. I just need to know kids ministry, and so we put it all in one big bucket. But we do not make line items available for personnel salary. I think Now, then you can ask the question: was how much accountability should there be people that see that? And obviously, yes, there are access to that. And I think in my church, there's like 4 or 5 people that maybe 4 that know the individual breakdown.
Mhm.
And you gotta tell them, hey, this is confidential. You're not
Mhm.
to share this information. So there is transparency. It's not there's just one person that sees it all. There's transparency within the trusted leadership, and so when our finance director takes his role, he's trusted with that by the church to have someone who's going to be able to speak into that.
It's always good to have someone that knows your books, is caring for them, and can look over them and make recommendations to you on those type of issues, like Cheney and Associates.
Hmm.
They're the ones that I would trust with my books and say, okay, if you see anything in the personnel area that doesn't look right, if you see anything in other areas, let us know, because we want to be totally above board. And we know that Cheney is the leader in this area with 1,100 churches. So
Yeah, that's a great point. That's one thing we haven't talked about. If you were to have someone to do your finances outside the church, it adds that level of accountability and trust, and that you can have a third party
that's
come
right.
in and say, no, these are exactly within a certain range of salaries. Like we affirm these even though they don't know what they are. We have no skin in the game, but we'll just tell you and your church family that these salaries are appropriate. That's a
and
great
and, and
benefit.
it's and it's being handled well.
Yeah.
They're not only appropriate, but it's being handled well.
So
That
it's
that's why Cheney's grown so much.
yeah. So if you're in a place where you're looking for someone to help with your finances and accounting and bookkeeping, check out CheneyAssociates.com/church-answers. I believe it's church-answers.
No,
Um,
have no idea why they put a dash in there, but
click the link. Click the link below.
or just go to Cheney and Associates. Well, we like them to go through our link because that means we sent them to them. So
Yeah. Well, regardless, if you reach out and let them know you heard about
talking
us in
about
the
the dash factor.
let them know that you heard about them on the Church Answers podcast. But that's a great point. Having that outsource can really help with this particular question. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Cheney Associates. They want you to lead your church and they can do that by handling the numbers. They know churches so well. They speak church language. In fact, I talked with one that I mentioned earlier. I talked with one of their staff recently, and they know church.
You could
This
tell it just by the conversation, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, this particular guy was a pastor for 25 years that works for
Wow.
Cheney Associates. So yeah, they know their stuff. So well, thanks so much. These past 2 episodes have been fun. They've been eclectic, and we've been all over the place. I feel like, and
We'll do
it's
it
been
again
good though.
sometime.
Yeah, it's been good. So this episode and the previous one, we've answered a total of 10 questions that we have heard at Church Answers. I hope it was fun for you, just to maybe think about some things, how you might handle some things, think about the future. Who knows? But we know you're gonna have more questions. You're gonna have more church questions, and we're gonna be here, hopefully, providing some church answers. So thanks so much for joining us here at the Church Answers podcast. We look forward to seeing you again, and we look forward to answering more questions down the road. We'll see you in the next episode.